streets, and its mellow tones are these, Illinois, Illinois, and its mellow tones are these, Illinois.
From a wilderness of prairies, Illinois, Illinois, straight thy way and ever varies, Illinois, Illinois.
The state of Illinois calls Mrs. Catherine O'Leary for a deposition. Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name for the record.
Mrs. Catherine O'Leary. Friends call me Kate.
What is your address?
137 DeCoven Street.
Do other people live there?
Yes. Me husband Patrick and our 5 children. We all live in the back section of the house, and our neighbors rent the front part from us.
Do you own a cow?
Yes, we did own 2 cows, Daisy and Bessie.
And where did you keep your cows?
In our barn out back, with 3 other cows that belonged to our neighbors.
Where were you on Sunday, October 8, 1871?
In the morning, we all went to Mass at Holy Family Parish. After that, we were home all day.
Did you go to the barn that day?
Yes.
At what time?
Patrick went out before church to milk our cows. I went out again at 5 p.m. to milk them again.
When you went out at 5 p.m., was it dark in the barn? Did you take a lantern with you?
Yes.
You have heard the testimony of Tribune reporter Michael Ahern and your neighbor Daniel Peg-Leg Sullivan.
Yes, I heard them.
When you finished milking your cows at 5 p.m., why would you leave your lighted lantern behind in the barn?
I did not leave my lantern in the barn. I took it back inside with me.
Was there another lantern in the barn?
No. The cows had finished reading the Sunday papers.
Move to strike, Your Honor, as sarcasm.
Strike the last remark from the record!
So you are telling us that there was no lantern in the barn?
Yes. There was no lantern in the barn when I left at 5:15.
If there was no lantern in the barn, then how did the fire start?
I don't know.
You heard Daniel Sullivan testify. He saw the fire and turned in the first alarm 4 hours later at 9 o'clock. Where were you at 9 p.m.?
We were all inside, sound asleep.
Can you think of any other possible cause of the fire?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
The witness may step down.
The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 killed 200 people and destroyed thousands of buildings. The fire turned out by the lake on October 10, but left 100,000 people homeless, almost 1/3 of the population of the city. Ironically, the O'Leary home itself, their nearby Holy Family Parish, and the water tower at 820 North Michigan Avenue, all were spared from the fire when the wind pushed it away. Only 5 days after the Great Fire, members of the Illinois State Society of Washington, D.C., sent $3,000 to Chicago Mayor Joseph Medill to help with relief efforts. One more thing. In 1893, 22 years after the Great Fire, Tribune reporter Michael Ahern finally admitted that he made up the cow story to make his copy more colorful. Some historians think that he might have also been trying to protect local boys who were smoking in the barn at 9 p.m., and he did not want them to be lynched by angry neighbors. But to this day, many people still believe the legend about Mrs. O'Leary's cow. The official cause remains a mystery, but the cow legend was not true. Today, the address of the O'Leary home at 137 DeKoven Street is the address of the Chicago Fire Academy, where dedicated young men and women are trained to fight fires.
I was a famous Chicago retailer, born in 1834, whose most famous quotation was, "Give the lady what she wants." Do you know my name now? Well, you should. I'm Marshall Field, founder of the Marshall Field Department Stores in 1831. My other famous quote is, "The customer is always right." All right, somebody knows that one. Thank you. I feel better already. My other famous quote, I love it. I'd love to repeat it. But I both pioneered and copied many innovations such as free delivery and an easy return policy. My business and personal fortune grew, and in 1893, I donated $8 million for a building in the Columbian Exposition, which still stands today as the Field Museum of Natural History. By the summit of my career, I was one of the richest men in the world and the largest private individual taxpayer in the United States. It was then that my son, Marshall Field II, died in a shooting accident. My grandson, Marshall Field III, would serve in the same Illinois National Guard unit as Chicago Tribune publisher Colonel Robert McCormick in World War I. He would go on to purchase the Chicago Daily News and merge the Chicago Sun and the Chicago Times in 1946 to create the Chicago Sun-Times. Back when I died in 1906, John G. Shedd became president of Marshall Field and Company. John was the founder and first benefactor of the Shedd Aquarium. For over 100 years, thousands of Illinois families were loyal shoppers at Marshall Field stores. We started to make mints in 1929 that at first were called Franco's, but we changed the name later to Frango Mints with a G because we didn't want our customers to think that our candies were named for a Spanish dictator. Along with Frango Mints, other great traditions of our State Street store included the famous landmark clock, Christmas window displays, and visits for children with Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus. The end of our store brand came when the State Street sign came down in 2006 to be replaced by the Macy's name. But let me tell you, the famous clock, the landmark clock, remains on the building. I'm Marshall Field, and I was a retailing pioneer in Chicago.
My name is Ida B. Wells. I was a pioneer for advocate civil rights. Now, I was born a slave, but 6 months later, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation on New Year's Day of 1863. In 1884, I refused to be relocated from the ladies' car of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad Company when ordered by the conductor to move to the Jim Crow car. That happened 71 years before Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of the bus. So I was born in the South, but I spent my last 39 years, including all of my married life, based in Chicago. I was editor and publisher, and my husband was founder of one of Chicago's first black newspapers called the Chicago Conservator. I was a writer, a lecturer, and activist. I was one of the 2 women founders of the NAACP in 1909. I crusaded against lynchings and other hate crimes of my time. I was one of the first black women ever to run for public office in 1930 when I ran as a candidate for the Illinois State Senate. I died in Chicago in 1931 at the age of 69. My name is Ida B. Wells.
My name is Wyatt Earp, and I was born in 1848 in Monmouth, Illinois. During the Civil War, my 3 older brothers served in the Union Army, but our family moved to California in 1864 just as I reached the age for military service. Now, when I became a U.S. Marshal, there was almost no law in the West. On October 26, 1881, in Tombstone, Arizona, my brothers Virgil and Morgan and our dear friend Doc Holliday were wounded in the famous gunfight near the OK Corral. But our enemies, Tom and Frank McClory and Billy Clanton, well, they were killed. But wouldn't you know it, Ike Clanton just up and ran away. See, I walked away from that gunfight without a single scratch. That's right. Now, many years later, I advised the makers of Western movies in the early days of Hollywood. I was 80 years old when I died in California in 1929. Now, my life has since been celebrated in books, movies, and on television. As a matter of fact, from 1955 to 1961, actor Hugh O'Brien starred in a TV series called The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp. The show was the first so-called adult Western, and it made O'Brien a star. Coincidentally, Mr. O'Brien also grew up in Illinois, where he attended New Trier High School in Winnetka. My name is Wyatt Earp, and I survived the famous gunfight near the OK Corral, and I was born in Monmouth, Illinois.
My name is Sarah E. Good, and I was an inventor and businesswoman in Illinois. Now, I was born Sarah Elizabeth Jacobs into slavery, although sometimes I like to tell people I was born in Spain. One thing is certain, I gained my freedom at the end of the Civil War, and shortly afterwards, I moved to Chicago where I met and married my husband, Archibald Good. My husband was a carpenter. Now, the idea of being married to a carpenter and running a furniture store might seem natural now, but there was nothing natural back then about a former slave running a shop that became a thriving business. but most importantly, I became an inventor. My idea came out of the necessity of the times. In working with my customers, I learned about their needs. It led me to inventing a cabinet bed, also called the fold-away bed. See, many of my customers lived in small apartments, and they needed to maximize their space. So I developed a design for a bed that could be used for sleeping at night, but converted into a roll-top desk during the day. The bed I invented was complete with a mattress and spring support, and was attached by hinges that could be raised or lowered as needed. And because it was a roll top, it also provided storage. So on July 14th, 1885, I became the very first African-American woman to be granted a patent by the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office for my invention, the cabinet bed. As a result, today you have the Murphy bed and the hideaway bed and couch. I died in 1909. My name is Sarah E. Good, and I was an inventor and businesswoman in Illinois.
I was born on May 22nd, 1849. I was an American businesswoman, a socialite, and a philanthropist. My name is Mrs. Potter Palmer. I was known as Sissy to my family. My friends call me Bertha. You may call me Mrs. Potter Palmer. I married the Chicago millionaire Potter Palmer in 1870. Soon after our marriage, the Chicago fire of 1871 wiped out the Palmer house and most of our holdings. I had to rush off and wire the East so that Palmer could reestablish credit, borrow money, and rebuild his holdings. I was unusually poised for one so young, and together we reestablished our fortune. I quickly rose to the top of Chicago society. I was an early member of the Chicago Women's Club. This group of working women meant to discuss social issues and develop solutions. In 1893, Chicago was the site of the World's Columbian Exposition, a celebration of the discovery of the New World by Columbus. It would also mark the city's recovery from the Great Chicago Fire. Women would have a large presence in the fair, and the plum position was the president of the board of lady managers. I was selected to lead in 1891. I was famous for my free spending ways. My jewelry was legendary. So famous and fabulous that I appeared on a luxury liner wearing a tiara of diamonds the size of lima beans, a corsage panned with diamonds, a sunburst as big as a baseball, and a stomacher of diamonds, and strings of pearls around my neck. When a soloist from the Metropolitan Opera who was singing on the ship's concert saw me, she stopped singing right in the middle of a high note. I traveled throughout Europe, dining with kings and queens and statesmen, and I spent great sums of money on the Palmer Mansion in Chicago, starting with $100,000 and rising to $1 million. My husband, Potter Palmer, dictated in his will that a sum of money should go to whomever I married next. When asked why he would be so generous to his replacement, he replied, "Because he'll need it." I, Mrs. Pot, you know who I am.
I was an impresario and one of the most famous producers of the American theater. My name is Florenz Ziegfeld Jr., and I was born in Chicago in March of 1869. My father was an immigrant to Chicago and director of the Chicago Musical College, also known as the CMC. The CMC burned down in the Great Chicago Fire of October 1871, but it was back in business the very next year with 900 students. The CMC eventually became part of Roosevelt University in the 1940s. As a teenager, I had a creative penchant for publicity. I got in trouble selling tickets to kids in the neighborhood who wanted to see my invisible fish. What they saw was just a bowl full of water. My father made me return the money, and I was punished. My father opened the Trocadero nightclub in Chicago just before the start of the 1893 World's Fair. But it was not doing well, and when I returned from Europe, where I was supposed to be looking for musical talent for the fair, I instead brought back Sandow the Strongman, who appeared at the club and attracted socialites and others who decided to adopt the club as their favorite in spot. I displayed my talent for coordinating publicity campaigns and literally saved my father from bankruptcy. In 1895, I was preparing to produce a musical comedy on Broadway when I saw Anna Held sing in a London music hall. Together, Anna and I developed the chorus lines of Pretty Girls and musical reviews that eventually became the Ziegfeld Follies. Irving Berlin wrote a song called A Pretty Girl is Like a Melody that became the signature song of all the Follies. I became a theater owner and the most famous producer in the country. However, by 1912, Anna and I were going through a divorce. But 2 years later, I married actress Billie Burke. She was a raving beauty, 17 years my junior, and is remembered today for her role in 1939 as Glinda, the Good Witch of the North in The Wizard of Oz. Throughout the late teens and 20s, I produced the musical and comedy reviews known as the Ziegfeld Follies that made many stars, including Fanny Brice, Ed Wynn, Will Rogers, and W.C. Fields. In 1927, I produced the highly acclaimed Showboat on Broadway, which ran an incredible 527 performances. It was based on a book written by Edna Ferber when she lived in Hyde Park in Chicago. Then I lost a fortune in the stock market crash of 1929. I tried a revival of Showboat in 1932 to make money, but I got very sick. On the night of July 22nd, 1932, Billie Burke was informed that my pneumonia and a lung infection I had were getting worse, and I did not have long to live. I died that same night. It is ironic that when Billie got the news about me, she was filming a screen test with a young actor named Walter Pidgeon. 36 years later, in 1968, Walter Pidgeon was a Hollywood veteran when he played the role of Florenz Ziegfeld in Funny Girl, a film that starred Barbra Streisand as my Follies star, Fanny Brice. My name is Florenz Ziegfeld Jr., one of America's most famous showmen, and I was from Illinois.
Good evening. My name is Ernest Hemingway. I was born in Oak Park, Illinois in 1899. My father was a doctor, and my mother was a musician who forced me to take cello lessons as a child, but music was not for me. Near our summer home in Petoskey, Michigan, my father taught me to hunt and fish and go camping, which I loved. My first trade was journalism when I was a reporter for the Kansas City Star, where I learned how to write short and punchy sentences. But during World War I went to the front in France and Italy to drive an ambulance for the American Red Cross. In the 1920s, I lived in Paris, where I socialized with a colony of writers that included my mentors, Gertrude Stein, Ezra Pound, and James Joyce. We lived in the Latin Quarter, and our circle of friends also included painters such as Pablo Picasso. Literary and art critics called us the Lost Generation. I used that term myself in my early novel, The Sun Also Rises. In 1937, I was assigned as a reporter for the North American Newspaper Alliance to cover the Spanish Civil War. 2 years later, I wrote about the Spanish Civil War in my famous novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls. That was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. During World War II, I wrote many newspaper articles about American troops in France and Germany. One legend about me is only partly true. It is true that I was in Paris on the day that the American and Free French troops liberated the city from the Germans on August 25th, 1944. But it is not true that I formed my own band of partisans to liberate the bar at the Ritz Hotel the same day. I did, however, attend a reunion of the Lost Generation in Paris after the liberation. I lived several years again in Cuba after the war, where I was hurt not once, but twice in plane crashes. I wrote many successful novels and was awarded the Pulitzer Prize again in 1952 for my novel, The Old Man and the Sea. In 1954, I won the Nobel Prize for Literature for a body of work. My name is Ernest Hemingway, and I was a famous author from Oak Park, Illinois.
My name was Lucille Lanicky when I was born in 1906 in Quincy, Illinois. But you know me as film actress Mary Astor. I co-starred as the romantic lead with Humphrey Bogart in The Maltese Falcon. My father was an immigrant from Germany, and growing up in Quincy, I studied drama with my mother, and I learned to play the piano. I used that piano skill in the movie Meet Me in St. Louis and in other films. Because of anti-German passions in World War I, my father lost his job as a German teacher, and times were tough. In 1919, my photograph made me a finalist in a movie magazine contest, but the editors thought I was too young to start acting. When I was a finalist again in 1920, my parents began to look at my earning potential as a meal ticket for the family, and they controlled my income. Years later, our family financial tensions wound up in court. In 1925, Hollywood gossip columnist Luella Parsons suggested that I change my professional name from Lucille Lanicky to Mary Astor. By the way, Luella Parsons was a native of Freeport, Illinois. I worked constantly in movies, but I thought of myself as a featured player rather than a star in the parlance of Hollywood. I liked it that way, because I did not want the success of any movie to depend on my performance only. But in The Maltese Falcon, my character, Bridget Shaughnessy, paid the price for being the most famous murderess of film noir history when Sam Spade sent me over. My name is Mary Astor from Quincy, Illinois, and I took the fall.
My name is John Harold Johnson. I was founder of Johnson Publishing Company and Ebony Magazine. When I was 8 years old, my father died in a sawmill accident in Arkansas. I was lucky enough to have a very strong mother who brought me to Chicago at the end of the World's Fair of 1933 to 1934 to try to offer me opportunities I would not have had anywhere else. She taught me the values of hard work and integrity that served me well the rest of my life. I graduated from DuSable High School on the South Side. One of my classmates was the unforgettable Nat King Cole. And I was student council, president, and editor of the yearbook and the class newspaper. After I graduated in 1936, I got a tuition scholarship from the University of Chicago. I published the first edition of Negro Digest in 1942. And though it achieved some success, it was dwarfed by my next publication, Ebony, and later by Jet. I hold the distinction of having been the first African American placed on Forbes' list of 400 wealthiest Americans. In 1996, President Bill Clinton bestowed upon me the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I died in 2005 at the age of 87. And on January 31st, 2012, the United States Postal Service honored me with the commemorative stamp. My name is John Harold Johnson, and I became a groundbreaking businessman and role model in Illinois.
My name is Ruth Hannah McCormick. I was born in Ohio in 1860, and I was the daughter of the legendary Ohio Republican boss, Mark Hanna. But I spent most of my life in Illinois, where I owned a dairy farm in Byron on the Rock River in Ogle County. And later, I was the publisher of a newspaper in Rockford. I became a very active national leader in the women's suffrage movement. At one point, I even produced an 8-reel melodrama entitled Your Girl and Mine. This project was intended to gain support for the suffrage movement. Meanwhile, I had married Joseph Medill McCormick, who was part owner of the Chicago Tribune, and who later served as a U.S. Senator from Illinois, from 1919 until his death in 1925. After my husband died, I was the second woman elected to Congress from Illinois, and I served in the U.S. House until 1931. I gave up my House seat for an unsuccessful run for the U.S. Senate. But by then, I was a very prominent national Republican leader on women's issues, and I even appeared on the cover of Time magazine. I died in Chicago in 1944. My name is Ruth Hannah McCormick, and I was one of the pioneer women members of Congress from Illinois.
Guten Abend. My name is Oscar Mayer. I was born in Bavaria in 1859 and emigrated to Detroit in 1873 at the age of 14 to work as a butcher's apprentice. I worked hard and became a Wurstmacher, which is German for sausage maker and ham curer. I moved to Chicago in 1876, where I worked for Philip Armour Meat Packers at the Union Stockyard. My brother, Gottfried, he came over from Nuremberg in 1883 to help me when I bought the Kohlink Meat Market in an old German neighborhood on the near north side. Our business grew, and another brother, Max, came over in 1888 to work as our bookkeeper. As more German immigrants moved to Chicago, they flocked to our store for our popular Old World sausages, hams, bratwurst, liverwurst, bacon, and Wieners, which our non-German neighbors called hot dogs. In 1893, our growing company sponsored a German display at the Columbian Exposition, complete with polka bands. And by 1906, our wagon drivers made deliveries to stores all over Chicago and the suburbs. We copied an idea from the Chicago drugstore founder, Charles Walgreen, and started to put our Oscar Mayer brand name on many retail products. We were one of the first companies to participate in a new federal meat inspection system to certify the quality of products. And we started using the slogan, "Government inspected," as a selling point in our advertising. In 1936, my nephew suggested a new advertising gimmick. We built a custom-made vehicle. It just looked like a giant hot dog that we called the Wienermobile. It became a rolling billboard that we drove in parades all over Chicago and the suburbs. From 1940 to 1976, a little person by the name of George Mulchan became our goodwill ambassador as Little Oscar when he appeared in a chef costume at events with the Wienermobile. George and his helpers passed out thousands of plastic plastic hot dog whistles to children all over America. I died in 1955 at the age of 95 and was buried in the Rose Hill Cemetery. Long after my death, our company continued to make innovations in advertising. Our great classic song, "I Wish I Were an Oscar Mayer Wiener," became the longest-running jingle in the history of advertising. My name is Oscar Mayer, founder of the Oscar Mayer Company in Chicago. Yeah.
My name is Mahalia Jackson, and I was known as the queen of gospel music. I moved from the South to Chicago at the age of 16 and made my home there the rest of my life. After my first church service in Chicago, I performed "Hand Me Down My Silver Trumpet, Gabriel." I was immediately invited to join the choir of the Greater Salem Baptist Church at 215 West 71st Street in the heart of the South Side. I also remained a member of Greater Salem for all the rest of my 55 years on this earth. I toured Chicago area churches with the Johnson Gospel Singers, one of the first professional gospel groups. In 1929, I was blessed to meet the famous gospel composer Thomas A. Dorsey. Starting in the 1930s, I sang Mr. Dorsey's songs on tour for 14 years. Dorsey's song, Take My Hand, Precious Lord, became my signature song. In 1936, I married Isaac Hockenhill, but sadly, our marriage ended in divorce. My second marriage did not work out either. Many times in my life, I was offered more money to sing secular music, and my first husband, Isaac, pressured me to accept those offers. But I always said no, because I promised the Lord that my voice was His servant only and would not be used for commercial gain. In 1948, I recorded a song called Move On Up a Little Higher. That song was so popular that record stores could not keep it in stock. It sold 8 million copies and was honored in 1998 with the Grammy Hall of Fame Award. In 1963, when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his famous I Have a Dream speech at the Lincoln Memorial, I sang the song How I Got Over to over 250,000 people on the mall and to millions more in the television audience. After King was assassinated in 1968, I also sang at his funeral. When I died in 1972, 50,000 people filed past my coffin at the Greater Salem Baptist Church. The next day, more than 6,000 mourners attended my funeral service at McCormick Place. My pastor, the Reverend Leon Jenkins, Mayor Richard J. Daley, and the widow of Dr. King all paid tribute to me that day. Singer Aretha Franklin closed the service when she sang my song, Take My Hand, Precious Lord. I am Mahalia Jackson, the queen of gospel music.
Good evening. My name is Lottie Holman O'Neill. I was a suffragist who campaigned for the right for women to vote. I was very proud in 1920 when Illinois became the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Only 2 years later, in 1922, I was the first woman elected to the Illinois House of Representatives. I was born in 1878 in a very small town of Barry, Illinois, near the Mississippi River. I studied business education and moved to Chicago, where I met and married William O'Neill in 1904. My husband was an Irishman who came to Chicago by way of Australia. We lived in Downers Grove when William and our 2 sons campaigned for me for my first try for office. The 1920s were exciting times for women pioneers in politics. The year after I made history in the Illinois State Legislature, my friend Winifred Mason Huck was the first woman elected to Congress for Illinois, but she served for less than a year. With the exception of only 2 years after a bitter primary loss in 1930 to GOP rival Senator Richard Barr from Joliet, I served continuously in the House, Illinois House, from 1922 to 1950, when I won the election to the state Senate after Richard Barr retired. When I moved across the rotunda to take my oath as state senator, there were no restrooms for ladies near the Senate floor. So the janitors improvised plumbing for a ladies' room in a closet. And my male colleagues immediately called that closet Lottie's potty. I did not mind the teasing from the men because I was passing legislation for education reform that I could not pass before when I was working in the House. One of my laws, still on the books today, required that 8th graders must pass a test to show that they understood the U.S. Constitution, and that high school seniors must pass a test on the Constitution of the state of Illinois. In the 1920s, I was called a progressive, even though I was in favor of prohibition. Over the next 40 years, I took a mixture of liberal and conservative views and positions on different issues. I was an advocate for civil rights for minorities, and I warned of the dangers of communism. I grew more conservative in my later years when I became known as the conscience of the Senate. Well, someone had to do it. In 1956, I made national Republican leaders very uncomfortable at our national convention when I demanded that doctors for President Eisenhower must fully disclose to the delegates all of the details of President Eisenhower's health from his heart attack the previous summer. One time, a friend asked me if I would like a statue of me in the state capitol to recognize my status as the first woman in the legislature. I replied, no, because I did not want to face my enemy, Richard Barr, for all eternity across the rotunda. But guess what? 9 years after I died, in 1967, at the age of 88, the state of Illinois dedicated a bronze statue of me in the rotunda. Yes, you guessed it. I'm facing a statue of Richard Barr on the other side. My name is Lottie Holman O'Neill, and I represented DuPage County in the Illinois State Senate.
Hello. My name is Jonathan Luther. But my nickname was Casey Jones. No, that's better. I became an American folk legend as an engineer for the Illinois Central Railroad. I started working for the IC during the 1893 Columbian Expedition in Chicago. I ran a commuter shuttle to take visitors from Van Buren Street to the fairgrounds in Jackson Park. Then I was promoted to engineer passenger trains on the Cannonball Run from Chicago to New Orleans. On April 30th, 1900, I was on the final leg of a Cannonball Run from Memphis, Tennessee to Canton, Mississippi. We were trying hard to make up time at 4 a.m. when we came around a blind curve at 75 miles per hour. Suddenly, my fireman, Simeon Webb, hollered at me, "There's something on the main line, Casey." Well, I hollered back, "Jump, Sim, jump now." Sim jumped, but I stayed at my throttle and brakes to somehow slow the engine to 35 miles per hour before we plowed into the caboose of the freight train ahead. I was killed in the wreck. All my passengers were safe, though. And wouldn't you believe it? The very next day, passengers and reporters called me a hero for staying with the engine. And my story became famous when Simeon Webb wrote a song called "The Ballad of Casey Jones." I'm Casey Jones, and I was an engineer for the Illinois Central Railroad.
I was born in a poor black slum in East St. Louis, Illinois, in 1906. My name is Josephine Baker, and I became famous as an American expatriate in France in the 1920s. It was the time of the lost generation of American writers who lived there, such as Gertrude Stein and Ernest Hemingway from Oak Park, Illinois. I was the favorite of artists and intellectuals like Picasso. And now, I never really was a great artist. I was a human being who loved art, which is not the same thing. But I loved and believed in art and the idea of universal brotherhood so much that I put everything I had into them. And I was blessed. When I was 68 years old, I put on one last spectacular performance in 1975. I had a dozen costume changes, and with tears streaming down my sequined eyelids, I stole the show one last time. My funeral was in Paris, but I was born in East St. Louis, Illinois. My name is Josephine Baker.
And I am Edgar Rice Burroughs, the author of Tarzan of the Apes. I was born in Chicago on September 1st, 1875. My novel about Tarzan was published in 1912. Tarzan instantly became a cultural sensation. I was determined to capitalize on Tarzan's popularity in every possible way. I wanted to promote Tarzan through several different media, including Tarzan comic strip, movies, and merchandise. But the experts told me that different media would just compete against each other, and they strongly advised against that. I proved the experts wrong. The public wanted Tarzan in whatever fashion he was offered. Tarzan remains one of the most successful fictional characters to this day and is still a cultural icon. My name is Edgar Rice Burroughs, and I'm from Illinois.
Hi, my name is Miles Dewey Davis, and I was born on May 26, 1926, to an affluent African-American family in Alton, Illinois. My father was a dentist, and in 1927, the family moved to East St. Louis, Illinois. It was in East St. Louis that I developed my earliest appreciation for music, listening to the gospel music of the black church. My musical studies began at 13 when my father gave me a trumpet and arranged lessons with the local musician Elwood Buchanan. Against the fashion of time, Buchanan stressed the importance of playing without vibrato. He was reported to slap my knuckles every time I started using heavy vibrato. I would carry my clear signature tone throughout my career. By age 16, I was playing professionally when not at school. In 1944, the Billy Eckstine Band visited East St. Louis. Dizzy Gillespie and Charlie Parker were members of the band. And I was brought in on a third trumpet for a couple of weeks because the regular player was out sick. Even after that success, my parents wanted me to finish school. So I graduated from East St. Louis Lincoln High School in 1944. But eventually, I became regarded as one of the most innovative, influential, and respected figures in the history of music. I have been described as one of the great innovators in jazz. The Rolling Stone Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll noted, No other jazz musician has had so profound an effect on rock. My album, Kinda Blue, is the best-selling album in the history of jazz music. I died at the age of 65 in 1991. But on November 5th, 2009, there was a measure in the United States House of Representatives to recognize and commemorate my album, Kinda Blue, on its 50th anniversary. The measure also affirmed jazz as a national treasure and encourages the United States government to preserve and advance the art form of jazz music. It passed unanimously with a vote of 409 to 0 on December 15th, 2009. My name is Miles Davis, and I was from Alton, Illinois.
We took off from the island of Tinian on August 6, 1945. From 31,000 feet above the target, we felt a shock wave after the flash. My co-pilot wrote only 2 words in his diary. Those 2 words were, "My God." Below us, the entire city of Hiroshima was incinerated, leaving 90,000 people dead and missing. My name is Paul Tibbets, and I was the pilot in command of our plane. The B-29 was named the Enola Gay, after my mother. I was born in Quincy, Illinois in 1915. I graduated from Western Military Academy in Alton in 1933. It was my tragic duty to fly our plane on a mission to drop the first atomic bomb ever used in a war. President Truman ordered us to drop the bomb because he needed a quick end to the war. The president said he was afraid that a huge number of Americans would be killed if we were forced into conventional invasion of the home islands of Japan. Today, the Enola Gay is on display near Dulles Airport at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center. My name was Air Force Brigadier General Paul Tibbets, and I was a proud native of Illinois.
When I was born in New York in 1921, my name was Anne Frances Robbins, but my nickname was Nancy. My mother was actress Edith Luckett, who appeared on stage and in silent movies. But my parents separated when I was only 2 and divorced when I was only 7. So my mother had to return to acting to make money. When Mother was on the road, I lived with her sister's family in Bethesda, Maryland. So I was very happy when Mother was married again to Dr. Loyal Davis of Chicago, and Dr. Davis legally adopted me. I adored my new stepfather and our new home. I attended the Girls' Latin School in Chicago from 1929 to 1939 and graduated from Smith College in Massachusetts in 1943. After college, I worked as a sales clerk in the Marshall Field department store and later as a nurse's aide. Mother had many actress friends who helped me get cast in the 1946 musical play with Yul Brynner and Mary Martin and directed by John Houseman. In 1949, I signed a 7-year contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer and moved to Hollywood. I went on dates with movie stars such as Clark Gable, Robert Stack, and Peter Lawford, who later married the sister of John F. Kennedy. But in 1951, another actress with the same name as mine, Nancy Davis, appeared on a black list of possible communist sympathizers. And that confusion was preventing me from getting work. So I asked the president of the Screen Actors Guild to clear up the confusion. Afterward, we began dating and we fell in love and got married in 1952. Oh, by the way, his name was Ronald Reagan from Dixon, Illinois. Ronnie not only served 6 terms as president of the Screen Actors Guild, but he was also elected governor to California in 1966 and president of the United States in 1980. But I was not the only first lady who lived in Illinois. Actually, there have been 6. In addition to me, the other 5 have been Mary Todd Lincoln, Julia Dent Grant, Hillary Rodham Clinton, Michelle Obama, and Elizabeth Ann Bloomer of Chicago, who later became known as Betty Ford. My name is Nancy Davis Reagan, and I grew up and worked in Chicago.
My name is Gwendolyn Brooks, and I was one of America's most famous poets. My grandfather escaped from slavery to join the Union Army during the Civil War. In 1917, I was born in Kansas. But we moved to Chicago when I was only 6 weeks old during what was called the Great Migration of Black families to Illinois. I attended Hyde Park High School, Wendell Phillips High School, and Inglewood High School. I was only 13 when my first poem was published in a magazine for children. By age 16, I had already published 75 poems. At age 17, my poems were being printed in the poetry column of the Chicago Defender newspaper. In 1936, I graduated from Woodrow Wilson Junior College, that is now called Kennedy King College. Very few Chicagoans today appreciate the importance of Poetry magazine, which was started in Chicago in 1912 by Harriet Monroe. Believe it or not, that tiny magazine, which published Illinois poets such as Carl Sandburg and Edgar Lee Masters, made Chicago the poetry capital of the world. Poetry magazine also helped me gain a large audience. My first book of poems was called A Street in Bronzeville, and it won instant critical acclaim. In 1950, I became the first African American to win the Pulitzer Prize for poetry. In 1962, President John F. Kennedy invited me to read at the Library of Congress Poetry Festival. I began a second career as a teacher of creative writing at several different colleges in Illinois. After the death of Con Sahlberg, the Illinois General Assembly invited me to become the second poet laureate of Illinois in 1968. Middle schools in Harvey, Bolingbrook, and Oak Park, as well as the State Library in Springfield, were all named in my honor. I died exactly 13 years ago tonight on December 3rd, 2000, at the age of 83. I was buried in Lincoln Cemetery in Blue Island. My name is Gwendolyn Brooks, and I was the Poet Laureate of Illinois.
sorry. I am novelist and playwright Edna Ferber. I was born in 1885. My father, Jacob Ferber, was a Hungarian Jewish shopkeeper, and my mother was from Milwaukee. As a child, I grew up partially in Chicago, Iowa, and Wisconsin. My dream was to study at Northwestern University's School of Education, but my family's finances were too limited for that goal. When my father died, my mother, my sister, and I moved to the south side of Chicago. For the next 13 years, throughout World War I, we lived in different apartments on Vincennes Avenue, Eastview Park, and finally at the Windermere Hotel in Hyde Park. Those years marked a period of prolific writing. My stories about the hardships of women in Chicago and Illinois were hugely popular. One heroine in That Hometown Feeling observes life from the perspective of a newspaper stand at the corner of Clark and Randolph Streets. In my short story called Blue Blood, I wrote about the stockyards. Though a large city, Chicago had the feel of a small town, especially on the public beaches that were great equalizers of the population. In 1924, I won the Pulitzer Prize for So Big, my novel about the hard life of a woman raising a child on an Illinois farm. Two of my best-known books, Stage Door and Showboat. Showboat was made into a play with my friend George Kaufman. Stage Door was made into a play with my friend George Kaufman, and Showboat was made into a play on Broadway and then later as a musical and a film. It was produced by Illinois native Florenz Ziegfeld. One of the stars of Showboat, both on stage and in the film version, was actress Helen Morgan, who was from Danville, Illinois. In 1968, I died at the age of 82. My obituary in the New York Times stated that critics in the 1920s and the 1930s praised me, Edna Ferber, as the greatest American woman novelist of her day. I'm Edna Ferber.
My name is Lyman Frank Baum. I was born in New York in 1856, but in 1891 I started to work as a reporter for the Chicago Evening Post. In 1897, my first book for children called Mother Goose in Prose was published. In 1900, Chicago publisher George M. Hill published my book called The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. This book became one of the most popular, best-selling children's books of all time. Now, one key difference between my book and the hugely successful 1939 movie based on my work is that in my book, the journey is to a real place, but in the movie, the journey is portrayed as a dream for Dorothy after she is knocked unconscious by a cyclone. I wrote several other books about the Land of Oz, and after 19 years of publishing all my most important books in Chicago, my wife and I moved to Hollywood, California in 1910. I lived there until my death in 1919. My name is Lyman Frank Baum, and I was a famous author and reporter for the Chicago Evening Post.
One of my legacies was my recorded album of inspirational readings when I said, "Tyrants must know, now just as then, they cannot stand, not as long as there are gallant men." My name is Everett McKinley Dirksen. My parents were immigrants who moved to a small farm near Pekin, Illinois, where I was born in 1896. My father was a staunch Republican, and he named me for President William McKinley and my brother for President Benjamin Harrison. In World War I joined the Army as a second lieutenant in the field artillery, where one of my dangerous jobs was to go up in a hot air balloon to guide the fire of our cannons against German fire. But our balloon was also an easy target for German fire, so we could not stay up for very long. After the war, my wife Luella and I met when we shared an interest in acting in amateur plays by William Shakespeare, and where I learned to cultivate a distinctive speaking voice. My brothers and I opened a bakery in Peoria with limited success. Then I served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1933 to 1949. Then I defeated the U.S. Senate Democratic leader Scott Lucas for the Senate seat from Illinois in 1950. I became the Republican minority leader in 1959 and helped President Johnson round up GOP votes for the Civil Rights Act of 1964. On January 20, 1969, I was given the unusual honor of being the only member of Congress ever invited to ride in the limousine with both the outgoing President, Lyndon Johnson, and the President-elect, Richard Nixon, to the presidential inauguration. I died in the fall of that year. My name is Everett McKinley Dirksen, a Republican leader in the United States Senate from Illinois.
Evening. My name is Major Robert Lawrence, and I am the first astronaut of African American heritage. I was born in Chicago in 1935. I received a BS in chemistry from Bradley University in Peoria in 1956. And then I got my doctorate in nuclear chemistry from Ohio State in 1965. I was a major in the United States Air Force when selected for the astronaut program. But before I could make my first space flight, I died on December 8th, 1967. I was practicing Zoom landings at Edwards Air Force Base in an F-104B. Our plane came in too low and hit the runway. My co-pilot ejected and survived, but I was killed. I was only 32 years old, and I left behind a wife and one son. But my legacy is that I was the first African American astronaut in NASA's space program. My name is Major Robert Lawrence, and I was from Illinois.
Hello. My name is Walt Disney, and I was born in Chicago in 1901. Now, part of my childhood was spent in Iowa and Kansas City, but when I was 16 years old, my family and I returned to Chicago. It was there that I attended McKinley High School and took night classes at the Chicago Art Institute. Now, after considering whether or not to become an actor or a newspaper artist, I decided on a career as a newspaper artist, drawing comic strips. But when nobody wanted to hire me as an artist or even an ambulance driver, my brother Roy got me a temporary job through a bank colleague at the Pessman Art Studio. It was there that I created display advertisements for newspapers, magazines, and movie theaters. But soon after, I decided to branch out on my own, and I started a commercial company. As aspiring animators and entrepreneurs, my brother Roy and I pooled our money together, and we set up a cartoon studio in Hollywood. I eventually created the character Mickey Mouse, and I was even Mickey's voice and personality until 1947. Along with characters Donald Duck, Goofy, Pluto, and a host of animated films based on books and fairy tales, the Disney empire grew. I won 22 Academy Awards. And in 1955, my brother Roy and I went on to open Disneyland in Anaheim, California. Unfortunately, I died in 1965 before Walt Disney World was ever finished. You know, I often said that the firehouse in Disneyland was inspired by a firehouse that I recalled from my youth in Illinois. And remember, a dream is a wish your heart makes. My name is Walt Disney.
My name is Jackie Joyner Kersey, and I'm a member of the U.S. Olympic Hall of Fame. I am widely regarded as the best all-around female athlete in the world. I was born in East St. Louis, Illinois on March 3rd, 1962. My parents struggled to provide a warm and safe home in a very tough neighborhood. They wanted me to grow up and accomplish anything I wanted to do. And their efforts paid off because later, in 4 consecutive Olympic Games from 1984 to 1996, I won 3 gold, 1 silver, and 2 bronze medals in track and field events. I once held the 6th highest scores in the world for the Olympic heptathlon and have held the heptathlon world record for the last 20 years. According to family legend, I was named Jackie after First Lady Jackie Kennedy because my grandmother wanted me to be First Lady of something. At the age of 10 in 1972, I started in an athletics program at the Mary E. Brown Community Center in East St. Louis, where I started to train for track and field events. Now, some of my elders consider track to be unfeminine. This was in the early 1970s. But I rejected this stereotype. I once wrote, I see elegance and beauty in every female athlete. I don't think being an athlete is unfeminine. I think of it as a kind of grace. In 1986, I married my UCLA coach, Bob Kersey, and I traveled to Moscow for the first Goodwill Games, where I was the first woman to break 7,000 points in heptathlon events. That same year, I learned that the Mary E. Brown Community Center that was so important to my youth was closing. So I started the Jackie Joyner Kersey Foundation and Community Center. The foundation raised $12 million and built a new youth and athletic center near East St. Louis. The center officially opened on March 1st, 2000. I have used my fame and celebrity to help raise money for youth projects in my home state of Illinois. And my name is Jackie Joyner Kersey.
Hi. I'm Bonnie Blair, and I was born in New York in 1964, but I grew up in Champaign, Illinois. I am one of the most decorated Olympic athletes of all time, and I owe a lot to the support of the many people in my hometown. In 1982, when I was a senior at Centennial High School in Champaign, I needed $7,000 to travel to Europe. I went to see 2 officers of the Champaign Police Youth Benevolent Fund. They said they weren't even sure what speed skating was. But they got behind me in big ways, and so did the local Chamber of Commerce leaders. I said the sum might as well have been $7 million because I didn't have the money to travel. But the officer said to me, "Bonnie, you go skate and let us worry about the money." They first raised $7,500 and more money later to help me train and go to Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, for the 1984 Winter Olympics. I competed for the United States in the Winter Olympic Games of 1984, 1988, 1992, and 1994. I won 5 gold medals and 1 bronze medal, and I am now in the U.S. Olympic Hall of Fame. My name is Bonnie Blair, and I will always be grateful for the wonderful support from my hometown, Champaign, Illinois.
All right, everybody, huddle up now. Huddle up now. Need to see everyone here. Heads up, eyes on me, especially you in the back. I'm watching you. My name is George Hallis. My nickname is Papa Bear. I was a player, coach, and owner of the Chicago Bears and founder of the National Football League. My parents came over from Bohemia, and I was born in Chicago in 1895. I graduated from Crane High School. In 1915, I was working for the Western Electric plant in Cicero, and I wanted to attend our company picnic. But I was late that morning, and when I got to the Clark Street Bridge, I saw our tour boat, the SS Eastland, roll over on its side, killing 844 of my coworkers, friends, and neighbors. It was the worst loss of life on water in Chicago history. But my life was spared because I was late. After the Eastland disaster, I earned a degree in civil engineering from the University of Illinois, where I played football, baseball, and basketball. I was named Most Valuable Player in the Rose Bowl game of 1919. I still played football at Great Lakes Naval Station when I served as a Navy ensign during World War I. I even played 12 games as an outfielder for the New York Yankees. But a hip injury ended my short time as a baseball player. I moved to Decatur, Illinois to work as a sales rep for the Staley Company, where I coached the team that later became the Chicago Bears in 1922. As a player in 1923, I forced the legendary Jim Thorpe to fumble a ball that I returned 98 yards for a touchdown. That record stood until 1972. In 1925, I recruited the famous University of Illinois running back Red Grange from Wheaton, Illinois, to play for the Bears. And that helped put the NFL on the map. Red Grange was called the Galloping Ghost. Over my next 42 years as a coach and owner of the Bears, we won 8 championships and inducted 27 players into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I retired as the oldest coach in the league after the 1967 season. Even though I died in 1983 at the age of 88, to this day, every Bears uniform includes my initials, GSH, for George S. Hallis. I am Papa Bear from Illinois.
I'm trying to get to heaven. Can you tell me where that is? Unlike others here tonight, I can't tell you definitely when I was born. And I can't tell you definitely when I died. Because people from Illinois can't decide who I definitely was. But I tell you this. I am Chicago's most famous ghost. I am Resurrection Mary, and I definitely died in Illinois. You see, starting in the 1930s, my apparition has been appearing along Archer Avenue near the O. Henry Ballroom. A man named Jerry Paulus first spotted me at a dance hall back in 1939. He noticed a beautiful blonde, and we danced all night long. Then, I asked Jerry to give me a ride home down Archer Avenue. As we were passing Resurrection Cemetery, I told him to stop. He did, and I got out of the car in front of the cemetery, and I disappeared into thin air. 40 years later, Tribune columnist Bill Geist interviewed a cab driver who claimed that he picked up a woman in a white dress and matching shoes. As he drove down Archer, she told him to stop the car. When he did, she disappeared. And through the years, other men have told of giving a ride to a young woman in a white dress who disappeared when they got close to the cemetery. Dozens of reports have been made by people who had to slam on the brakes because a young woman jumped out in front of their car, or who have seen her walking down the middle of the road. Singer Ian Hunter wrote a song called Resurrection Mary, in which a driver near Chicago picks up a beautiful young woman with an incandescent glow. She tells him, "I'm trying to get to heaven. Can you tell me where that is?" So, who was Resurrection Mary? Nobody's really sure. Some think I was Anna Maria Norcus. She died in a car accident in 1927. Others think I was Mary Bregovy, who was killed in an accident in 1934. But one thing is certain. The next time you're back in Illinois and you happen to be driving down Archer Road, be on the lookout for a woman in a white dress. Do stop to pick me up, for I'm trying to get to heaven. Can you tell me where that is? Why, it's in Illinois.
rivers gently flowing, Illinois, Illinois, o'er thy prairies verdant growing, Illinois, Illinois, comes an echo on the breeze, rustling through the leafy trees, and its mellow tones are these, Illinois, Illinois, and its mellow tones are these, Illinois.
From a wilderness of prairies, Illinois, Illinois, straight thy way and ever varies, Illinois, Illinois, till upon the inland sea